I'm not going to get into the legal or legislative issues or local policy issues related to mental health in the workplace, or speaking openly about mental illness, or the accommodations that might be legally required where you're working, or the restrictions that might be imposed because of the type of job that you're doing. That's not what this video is about. That's something really important that you take care of that and consider that in your own context. What this video is about is much more personal. It's about personal perspective and how you relate to your mental health issues in the workplace. So I'm going to talk about 5 different things that are worthwhile to consider as you're going through the process of deciding how or whether or not you're going to talk about mental health at work. The first thing to consider is so important when you're dealing with mental illness in any context, and that is to remember that you can recover from mental illness. Everybody has varying levels of improvable mental health, and we can do things to make our mental health better, and we can do things to make our mental health worse. Awareness of mental health challenges, of mental illnesses, is on the rise. More people are aware when they're struggling with mental health issues. There's much more openness. People are more aware and understanding of what's going on and what the symptoms are, and that is fantastic. But that goes 2 ways. Yes, on one hand, people are more aware of these issues and what people are dealing with. They're also more aware of the things you can do to improve your mental health, to overcome these mental illnesses. More and more people are not only connecting with others who are experiencing a mental illness, but more and more people are also connecting with others who have recovered from mental illness and are maintaining great mental health and maintaining their recovery. So just don't be surprised if you bring up your mental health challenges or mental illness at work, whether it's with somebody in HR or it's with your supervisor, your boss, whatever, and they then start to talk about the things they can do to support you in getting over those issues. As a society and as a medical establishment, for quite a long time, we have approached mental illnesses as permanently debilitating. You get a mental illness, you have a problem, we're going to throw you in an insane asylum, you're going to spend the rest of your life, painting Hello Kitty on the walls with your own feces. That was how, as a society, we approached mental illness. So of course, that created a lot of stigma. People didn't want to talk about what they were going through because they thought they would be perceived as having this terrible illness. They're going to be stuck with it. It's permanently debilitating. We know now that that is not true. People all the time are overcoming mental illnesses that we once thought were permanent and completely debilitating. They are not. However, it is an incredible amount of work to build great mental health and fitness, just like it's an incredible amount of work to build great physical health and fitness. It's going to require changes throughout your life. It's going to require a lot of support. But in the work context, be aware that as much as you may bring up these issues looking for support, that is going to be a 2-way street. You're going to be looking for accommodation to help you in overcoming those issues. Your workplace may also expect you to be doing things to overcome those issues because there's an increasing awareness that you can do things to overcome those issues. And that's fantastic. Yes, there's something you're struggling with, but it is amazing that we can do something about that. So let's do something about that. Sometimes it's difficult to get a handle on the idea that mental illnesses are things we can overcome because when we are experiencing them, it can seem completely impossible that they're things that we can no longer experience and they're things we can put behind ourselves. Know that the fact that we can recover from mental illness does not make your challenges any less real. It does not make them any less physical. It does not mean that you can just snap your fingers and get over them. It's no easier to snap your fingers and get over a mental illness than it is to snap your fingers and magically be able to swim. If you're drowning, there's nothing that you can do in that instant but think yourself into swimming. It's a process. That's a difficult concept sometimes, but if you're struggling with it, just entertain it for the moment, because the second point can also be difficult sometimes for people to accept at first. And the second point is that you are not alone in having a mental illness in your workplace. In fact, half of your coworkers will experience a mental illness in their lifetime. I hate to break it to you, but you are not a unique and special snowflake. Often in the media, you'll see mental health charities throwing around a statistic. Typically it's 1 in 5 or it might be 1 in 4. That statistic refers to the number of people in a given year who will experience a diagnosable mental illness. So in a given year, about 20% of people will be experiencing a diagnosable mental illness. There's a couple things about that. One, the fact that your mental illness is diagnosable does not mean that the other 80% of people have perfect mental health. They very well could be working their way up to having a diagnosable illness, but they just haven't kind of crossed that line and met all the criteria for having a diagnosable mental illness. But here's what I would say is the more important statistic. A Harvard Medical School study found that 46.4% of people will experience a diagnosable mental illness in their lifetime. So what that means is that they're going to meet the criteria in the DSM for having a mental illness. That does not mean, again, that the other people in the world have perfect mental health. They might have been working their way up to having a mental illness and they just weren't good enough at doing lots of compulsions or burying themselves in their addiction or having really unhealthy relationships. So if you've crossed that line into mental illness, somebody has been giving you a diagnosis, you were lucky enough to be able to access mental health services that could give you a diagnosis. Just know that you are not alone at all. Half of the people in your office are going to experience a mental illness. That means it's very likely many of them have already experienced a mental illness or are experiencing a mental illness right now. So when you're considering whether you're going to talk about mental illness at work, how you're going to talk about mental illness at work, consider how you're supporting your coworkers with their own mental health challenges, because it is statistically impossible that you are the only person in your workplace who's struggling with their mental health. There is a 100% chance that everybody in your office has mental health because everybody there has a brain. If you're conflicted right now because you feel you have this deep, dark, complex secret that you just can't possibly share with anybody, know that that just scientifically, statistically is not true. Although other people around you are going to be going through similar issues or are going to know somebody who's going through similar issues or are going to be able to identify with the kinds of challenges that you're encountering, although they might not be struggling with the exact same symptoms. How you talk about mental health and how you identify with your own mental health and the symptoms that you're struggling with is going to have a big impact on how people then relate to you and the issues you're talking about. This brings me to the third point, which is to remember that you are not your farts. I want to talk about two things when it comes to this point, and the first is to see mental illness issues as being like farts. If you're struggling with a farting problem, everybody around you is going to know. You may be trying to hide it. You may be not admitting that you're the source of the stuff that's stinking up the office, but everybody knows that it's actually you who's stinking up the office. If you're denying the problem, or you're trying to pour all of your time and energy into managing the problem and trying to cover up the problem, or you're avoiding different responsibilities around work or different events or different meetings because of the problem, people in your workplace, they are going to know. It is not a secret. And if you don't start to explain what's going on and what you're doing to fix it, recognizing that you can do things to fix these challenges, and you probably need to get other people's support to do that, if you don't start to be open about that, people are going to draw their own conclusions. They are going to start talking about you. They are going to think all sorts of terrible things, coming up with their own reasons for why you're doing what you're doing and why you're experiencing the problems you're experiencing. And I can guarantee you, people are not going to arrive at the conclusions that you would like them to. The second thing to remember here on this point is that you are more than your bodily functions and malfunctions. You are more than your farts. And this is really important when it comes to talking about mental health and how you relate to and identify with mental illness symptoms, mental health challenges, whatever it may be, and however you may describe it. If you decide you want to define yourself as your mental illness and a bunch of mental illness symptoms, don't be surprised if people don't like interacting with that identity as well. If you identify with your mental illness and those symptoms that you don't like, that's probably also going to affect your own relationship with yourself and how you interact with yourself and how you view yourself. And your view of yourself is probably going to start to become quite limited by the confines of what you think you can or can't do based on the mental illness. That's going to have a big impact on how people interact with you. So try to remember that you are more than these symptoms you don't like. Those symptoms, they are not permanent. They are transient, and you are separate from them. If you're farting all the time, it is far more likely that there is something around you or something you're doing or something in your environment that's causing that. Farting is a symptom. Sure, you don't like it. Yeah, all the people around you don't like it, and they definitely know that you're struggling with those symptoms, but solve the problem. right? You are not a farter. Maybe you just farted, but you are not that fart. Right? You are something separate. That's something that happened, and you can change the things that cause that. Related to not identifying with your farts, or not identifying with your mental illness symptoms, or whatever biological malfunctions are going on in your gut or your brain, is the fourth point, which is to talk about mental health, not mental illness. It's important to understand that this is not about denying mental illness. That mental illness is real, it's having serious impacts on your life, it's going to have serious impacts on the lives of those around you. This is not about denying that. This is about admitting, okay, there's a mental illness here, and now I'm going to focus on getting over it and getting better and improving my mental health. What I'm talking about here is being open about those steps and the supports you need to build better mental health. When it comes to talking about mental health rather than mental illness, try to look at it through the lens of physical health and fitness. If you're struggling with physical fitness, for example, it is very biological. If you haven't exercised your entire life, if you're struggling with obesity, there are very physical, very real effects that has on your body and the things that you can then do with your body. That might be interfering with your work. So you might decide, okay, so this is interfering with my work right now, I'm going to do something about this. Same with mental illness. You recognize, okay, my mental illness is now interfering with my work, there are things I can't do because of it, so I'm going to do something about this. Physical health and fitness is a very complex issue. There are genetic factors, environmental factors, socioeconomic factors, cultural factors, learned factors, and personal choice factors that all affect your ability to take care of your personal health and fitness, and the exact same is true of mental health and fitness. Whether it's dealing with the complex issues that affect your physical health and fitness, or it's about dealing with the complex issues that affect your mental health and fitness, those are issues that you can deal with, but it's going to take help, it's going to take support, it's going to take a lot of hard work. But I would recommend looking at how people talk about improving their physical health and fitness, particularly people who are successful at improving their physical health and fitness. They talk about what they're doing to get better. They don't just talk about the problems they have. They don't go to the gym and just talk about how much they can't lift. Even though they run into failure, they run into challenges, that's all seen as part of that positive process of getting better, getting healthier, and getting fit. Use the same approach when it comes to mental health. Yes, you're dealing with challenges. Yes, you will run into failure. You will run into all sorts of problems, but keep the focus on pushing your limits and where you're going and gathering together supports to help you on that process, to keep you moving forward. When you're thinking about talking about mental health and mental illness at work, consider whether or not you're looking to talk about a problem you have and that you're going to keep and be stuck in that place where you are right now, or are you looking to talk about what you're going through to get support to get better. Talking about getting healthy and where you're going is probably going to be easier for you and much more enjoyable, and it's going to be much easier to bring people together around the supports and things you need to get healthy, rather than trying to build support and community around mental illness symptoms you want to get rid of. People often ask me what it's like to be open about mental illness and what it's like to talk about mental illness in a work and social context, but I always emphasize that I don't talk about mental illness, I talk about mental health. The only time I ever bring up mental illness symptoms is when I'm explaining a particular challenge that I dealt with and then what I did to overcome that challenge. So it's really important to recognize those symptoms. Okay, those were the mental illness symptoms I was dealing with, but I'm talking about mental health. I'm talking about how do you improve your health and fitness. I mean, to go back to the fart example, I mean, all farts stink. There's no real use going around talking about farts and how my farts might stink differently than your farts. Everybody farts. Everybody has a gut, just like everybody has a brain. I think it's far more useful to talk about how we solve those problems. So to put this in a work context, again, to use the farting example, if Susan in accounting brings muffins to the office every week, and you're afraid of offending Susan, so you eat the muffins. But the muffins have this cream kind of filling and topping, and you're lactose intolerant, so eating Susan's muffins, you sit there and you eat them and you tell Susan, oh, they're so delicious, but the problem is you're lactose intolerant, so of course eating those muffins leads to all sorts of problems, and you farting up in the cubicle and making the whole office stink. You have a problem there where you're afraid of offending Susan, so there's a fear there. You're reacting to that fear by doing something that causes you problems. So this is just like what often happens with things like anxiety disorders, We react to the fear that we might do something that's going to cause a problem, and we react to that fear with a compulsion that only causes more anxiety, which only makes us miserable, only makes us depressed, only prevents us from doing our work properly. There's a solution here to this problem. It's A, to stop doing the thing that you know is causing the problem, and B, communicate with your coworker and explain what's going on so they can understand what's happening. They may be able to do something to fix this problem. You may be able to do something to fix this problem. It's likely you're both going to be able to do something to fix this problem. If you just keep tolerating these issues and pretending that there's nothing wrong and trying to cover them up, it's only going to cause more problems. So talk about what you can do to solve the problem. And that is going to be nerve-wracking. You're probably going to be afraid of bringing up these issues. You're going to be afraid of offending people. You're going to be afraid of other people thinking you have problems and you can't handle things. And those fears are totally normal, but also recognize those fears are part of the problem. And that is the fifth point, that your fear of stigma is part of the illness. When we're struggling with mental health issues, they're all about experiencing uncertainty and anxiety and other feelings we don't like, judging those feelings. Those judgments make us feel bad, we don't like those feelings, we want to get rid of them, and we react to that with coping and checking and controlling compulsions to try to make those feelings go away, and of course that only leads to more of those feelings. That is exactly what is happening if you react to the fear of stigma by trying to avoid situations, by trying to manipulate other people, by trying to lie to people, by trying to control what other people think about you. All of those things are only going to lead to more anxieties, more uncertainties, more fear, and more of the feelings you don't like. The fear of stigma is part of the illness. Reacting to that fear, just like reacting to any other fear with compulsions, is going to make the illness worse. The world is a scary place. Terrible things happen in the world all of the time. You cannot make all of those uncertainties go away, and you cannot control all of those uncertainties. And if you try to control all of those uncertainties, you will sink your life into trying to prevent the things you don't want, and you won't get any of the things you do want. So there are multiple issues you're going to be considering when you're thinking about whether and how you're going to be open about mental health in the workplace. Know that if you are waiting for stigma to somehow magically disappear, if you're waiting for your fears to be resolved, and you're waiting for that opportunity when you don't feel afraid, when you're certain that everybody is going to be kind to you, that they're going to be nice to you, that they're going to be understanding, that time is never going to come. Just like with any other uncertainty that you deal with, you can never be completely certain, and if you try to be completely certain, you're going to find that those fears are just going to become restricting, and they are going to narrow down your life, and they're going to prevent you from doing the things you want to do. Recovery is not about getting rid of your fears. It is not about preventing them from happening or feeling certain or reassured that they will never happen. You may get fired, people may talk about you, some of your coworkers may shun you, people at work who are struggling with their own mental health issues and their own issues with compulsive judging, they may be so nervous and anxious because of what you're talking about that they're going to shut down, they're going to run into problems, they're going to try to control you, they're going to do all sorts of things to you. I am not saying that that kind of stuff won't happen. It is all entirely possible. I can give you absolutely no reassurance that you won't be stigmatized at work. It's a possibility. On the path to recovery, on the path to building better mental health, of course we have to learn how to accept feelings we don't like and still make decisions that are aligned with our values and aligned with who we know we are. And so that's something really to keep in mind here. Yes, there are going to be uncertainties, there are going to be fears, terrible things happen all of the time, but what's a decision that's aligned with who you are and what you value in your personal life and in your work life? Let your values guide you through this, rather than letting fear lead you by the nose.